Okay, we're up and running. Thank you, Rob, and Taylor is our clerk today. I would like to welcome everyone to the Tompkins Intergovernmental Relations Committee. It is Wednesday, May 7th, and the time is 11:05. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Are there any changes to the agenda, Deborah? It's just you and me as far as the members.
Oh, I thought I was supposed to change something there for a minute. No, everything's fine. Thank you, Shauna.
Okay. The only, boy, it's like a dream come true, the two of us in charge, right?
Yes.
I'm just joking.
Let's take advantage.
So the only change that I have is that Harris Weiss is here from the governor's office and has some business to do this afternoon. So I would like to move him up in our agenda. Why don't we go ahead and do your announcement and comments first?
Sure.
If that's all right. And then we'll go from there. I do not see anyone here for public comment, and so we're going to skip that portion. As far as minutes go, we will review our minutes at the next meeting, unless we have someone, another member join us, in which case we'll bring those up. As far as the chair's report, I personally do not have much of a chair's report other than saying I really do appreciate NISAC's interview the other day with Steve Aquario that's on YouTube that talks about the cuts to Medicaid and how they will impact the counties, local municipalities, and overall the state budget. So I just want to say that was really helpful for me to watch. I've also shared it with my colleagues, and it appears that last night there was a news article on CNN that talked about how perhaps some of the Medicaid cuts are not going to happen. I guess Speaker Johnson had made that comment, but I'm assuming at this point, you know, this committee was set up for us to have discussions and to talk about things that are up and coming in our government. And so I'm very thankful that all of you have joined us today so that we can have that robust conversation. And for us, we're in the middle of our 2026 budget. We just had our first budget retreat last week, and while we're trying to predict the future, it is still very, very hard. And if there are going to be Medicaid budget cuts, we have not accounted for those in our upcoming budget. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Harris Weiss, and he is from Governor Hochul's office.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah. I am Harris Weiss, the governor's regional representative to the Southern Tier, covering 8 counties, including the great county of Tompkins. Just wanted to come here, introduce myself, talk a little bit about state. I was hoping by the time that I came here that we would have some more budget highlights, but considering budget bills were starting to be printed yesterday and should be starting to get voted on in short order. What I will say is, Shauna, if you can please feel free to share my contact information. I mean, most people have it, but share it with anyone that might not. And if there's any specific questions that I can get information on specific programs, specific policies, I know there's some really good, interesting nuggets in there. Happy to get that information out. A couple other just relevant items. Obviously, we're moving into the more legislative side of session once the budget finishes. So if there are any budget or any legislative items that you want to elevate, as Shauna did today by giving me a resolution, please let me know so I can get them in front of our policy team and our legal team. But the other 2 big things I just wanted to mention, obviously the governor and the attorney general have been very vocal on a lot of the federal cuts and federal changes that we're seeing, and is trying to figure out places where the state can be supportive. But definitely please keep me informed of anything that the county or anyone within the county is seeing negatively being impacted by some of the federal issues or just in general, so that way I can elevate them with our team. This also includes businesses that might be seeing issues with tariffs. We have through ESD, we have an email to collect information about issues and stories of what is happening is affecting businesses in the southern tier and just across the state. I know as we get into the summer months, tourism is really starting to get affected because of relations with Canada. So definitely want to know as things are going so that way I can get that into our team so they can kind of see the grand scheme where things are. And then the last thing I sent out to, I believe I sent it to you and Dan and Corsa, but there will be a CFA workshop ESD is hosting in Tompkins. I can't remember exactly what day the Ithaca one is, but I think that will be a good opportunity for anyone that is interested to see what sort of opportunities are available through the CFA workshop. So that way they could potentially apply and get some additional grant funding. I believe it's going to be the first week of June. I can resend the details, but those are really the big things. And as we finish up budget, definitely don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.
Thank you so much. Just to give you the heads up, I know that we do have two bills that are going to be sponsored by Senator Webb and Assemblywoman Kellis. The first one is requesting the retirement from a past pension for two of our, I believe, a lieutenant and a sergeant at the Sheriff's Department, that their retirement be considered cohesive so that they are able to gain the years that they've already served.
Gotcha.
And then the second one is increasing the number of IDA members from 7 to 9. And that was a resolution that this legislature passed. They've since gone to the Assemblywoman and the Senator. They're in the process of drafting their resolutions. They're coming back to us with the numbers for the bills, and then we have to pass them again and then send them back.
Oh, yeah.
So we're still in the process of doing that. I expect that would happen by the middle of May in the next meeting. So they'll be presenting those right after the budget.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Great.
So for the benefit of anyone who's watching, what is CFA?
Consolidated funding application. So New York State, some of the different funding programs, instead of it being all throughout the year, try to consolidate it so that way it's a little bit more manageable and a little bit more controlled and efficient. So it brings together ESD, parks, DEC, and a bunch of other agencies to kind of talk about their programming, so that way it's trying to be as close to a one-stop shop as possible.
That's the state version of FAFSA.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I do have a question. What's the temperature in the governor's office and in Albany generally about what might happen if Congress goes forward with the kind of cuts to Medicaid that we've been hearing about?
So, I mean, across the board, the biggest issue we're seeing is we pass a budget and then afterwards these huge cuts happen. That's part of why the governor had increased some of the rainy day fund that the state has, so that way we have more reserves than we've had in the past. But I know that she has said in the past that we may need to look at things as they happen because we don't know exactly what might get cut and then how we have to prioritize and how we can try to fill in some of the gaps. I know the governor has said, like, we are not going to be able to fill every gap just because that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is.
But I know the state is going to be reviewing everything coming out of Washington to try to figure out how to best move forward. So my biggest recommendation is keeping myself, keeping others in the state legislature, in the governor's office informed, and really just make sure that they know what you need and why. Just really how these cuts are so detrimental.
Is there any way to quantify how much New York depends on a Medicaid provider tax for this stuff? Because I'm reading that that's
I'm
one of the
sure
focuses.
that there's numbers there that I have not seen. We've got a lot of people in Division of Budget and our policy team that their whole job is just crunching numbers. And I'm sure there's something out there. If you email me, I'm happy to see what I can find out and get you connected. But yeah, definitely happy to see what information the state might have that might be useful.
Is there any talk about cutting back a little bit on what Medicaid covers?
I am not in any of those kind of conversations. I'm not in the policy conversation, so I can't comment specifics, just because I am not in the room where those kind of conversations take place.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments for Harris? Mike Sigler, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. No, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm late. The budget's going to go up about $10 billion, I think, something along those lines. I'm wondering, where's New York getting that income? Is there something that we're doing really well that we should continue to do?
I mean, the bulk of revenues come from, I believe, Wall Street, come from income taxes, come from federal grants. I haven't really done a deep dive into the revenues yet because the bills just literally are starting to get printed. But yeah, I mean, between, like, I know the bulk of a big portion of the revenue is from Wall Street proceeds.
Okay.
I don't know if that means it's good, bad, whatever. But I can definitely see if I can find some more specifics to get you.
No, I'm just curious. I mean, because, yeah, the budget in the last 6 years has gone up a lot. And, I mean, we must be doing real well doing something, so. And, you keep hearing the reports that people are moving out of the state, and that kind of belies the point of that. You know what I mean? I mean, if we have less people paying in, and yet we still have more income, we must be doing whatever that is.
Here, I'll see what I can find out.
I'm just interested. Thanks.
I could follow up on that. The latest figures I saw in something that was provided, I think, by NISAC is that that 19% of the state's budget revenues are coming from Wall Street, which I think it's great while we have it, but it does kind of put us in a precarious position.
Any other questions or comments for Harris? Well, Harris, thank you for joining us today. I know you're busy.
Thank you.
Thank you for your hard work.
Thanks.
We really value our relationship with the governor's office, so.
Oh, and just one last thing, just to mention, since the president is here, just to keep an eye on, is one of the big proposals that the governor was pushing that I believe made it in, but the finalized specifics of it I don't have, is the Ascent New York. That is a program to help get people 25 to 55 into community colleges to get the training they need in high demand fields, including nursing, high-tech manufacturing, things like that. So should have more details soon, but that should be a great program to help get people in Tompkins and Cortland going to your institution to get the training in some of the great programs you guys offer.
Great. Also, just to let you know, we did have a resolution that talked about the mandatory institutionalization of individuals here in this legislature, and that did not gain support, the majority of support here in this legislature.
Gotcha.
So I wanted to pass that on as well. I know that that was one of the governor's building blocks and something that she was talking about in her budget proposal, and just wanted to let you know, Tompkins, we were not on board with it. So
Understood.
wanted to pass that along. Great. Okay, well, thank you, Harris. We appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. Okay, let's go ahead and do our minutes. We do have a quorum here. If I could have a mover for the minutes of February 5th, 2025.
I'll move that.
Moved by Deborah. Mike Sigler, can you second the minutes,
Oh, yes,
please?
I'm sorry, I'm second.
That's all right. Seconded by Mike Sigler. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Okay, we were able to do that. I don't know if you guys realize this, but you are wearing matching shirts,
I know,
which I think is really cool.
We talked last
Didn't
night.
know if it was like Team Gingham or something, so,
It's spring.
You can always trust Sigler to be on top of the fashion.
yeah.
Just follow Harris.
Next, we'll move to our county administrator's report with Corsa. County
Yes,
administrator.
Thank you. I don't have any additional report based on what you've already indicated, so yeah, I'll pass on.
Okay, thank you, Corsa. And next, we have Dr. Amy Kriminek, who is here from Tompkins Cortland Community College, TC3. And I would like to apologize. Last time we invited you to our meeting, and it was the first meeting that we've had in, gosh, probably 2 or 3 years. And I was certainly long-winded and think I took too much of the meeting time. So Dr. Kriminek had to run to another meeting and we missed her report. So we're glad you're here, and we ended up moving you up to the top of the meeting because we definitely want to hear what TC3 has going on.
All right, thank you, Shauna, and I apologize that I needed to sign off a little early on the February meeting, but just to echo the comments of Harris, my plan in February was to highlight the what we're calling the SUNY Connect program, which is building on the governor's proposal to make community college tuition and fees and books free for adults in the state of New York, to focus on 9 high-demand, high-needs, high-cost fields. So these include advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence, certainly a number of healthcare fields, and these are areas that are obviously in high needs, not just around the state, but also in the region that we serve here in Tompkins and Cortland counties. This is focused on adults ages 25 to 55 who do not already have a degree. The benefit to this is that because many adults are unable to attend college full-time, which is required by the Excelsior program, this is also available, the way it's been proposed, to part-time students as well. And so I think that really recognizes the challenges that adults have to go to college for, particularly in some of these high-demand fields. So while we are awaiting, along with everyone, the final details of the budget, this is something that this college has really been gearing up for. We are working on right now finalizing the college's 2025 to 2028 strategic plan. It's a 3-year plan. 3-year horizon even these days seems a little long, but it's a 3-year strategic plan, and we invited in industries representing each of these sectors to have a conversation with us about the impact of this program on the college, on the region, and most importantly, how it can help people go to work in those fields. The good news is it was very well received by our industry partners, and this college then will be seeking to find ways to expand its footprint in many of these fields. The challenge is, as I said, is not only are these fields high needs and high demand, they are also high cost. These are some of the most expensive programs that can be offered by a community college, both in terms of the capital requirements, in terms of equipment and space, but also the types of faculty members who are needed, industry experts to really teach in these fields. You know, all of that being said, we welcome this opportunity and are hopeful that this will continue to allow us to serve more people in our 2 counties as well as in the region. So, we see that as a positive thing. That was to be my February update. So just to talk for a moment about the document that I included in your packet, we are creating a fast facts sheet, if you will, that really gives you kind of a snapshot of the college and where we are, some of our basic tenets. But there's a couple of things that I'd like to highlight for you that I think are particularly important at this time. First is that about 85% of college students, first-time, full-time students, who I think we probably all imagine are traditional college students, receive some form of financial aid. And as we are watching the challenges that are in place, certainly at the federal government with federal policy, and in particular impacts to the Pell program, that's something that is deeply concerning to us as an institution, deeply concerning to our students. We welcome the opportunity potentially to expand Pell for short-term workforce credentials. But at the same time, the college currently has over $9 million of Pell financial aid that it receives annually on behalf of our students to pay their tuition and fees. And certainly, if students were to not have access to the Pell program, I think it would absolutely impact their ability to attend college. And so the more that can be done to really help shore up the support for the Pell program, that's something we would certainly be in favor of. At the same time, another statistic that I just want to highlight for you is the age distribution of our students, and in particular an age group that we are seeing increased interest from, and that is adults that are in their 20s, 21 to 29, which aligns with the governor's proposal on free community college. This year we are tracking currently up in terms of enrollment, about 14%. It's early. That being said, we are seeing increased interest from what I would consider to be young adults kind of making their way into the world, which we think is positive. At the same time, we do have a proposal in front of Congressman Riley's office to help support a career center on our campus. Believe it or not, TC3 does not have a dedicated career center, which is fairly unique and for community colleges. We have people that do this work, but what we do not have is a space, and not just a space that perhaps those of us that were undergrads several years ago might be thinking of, but the kinds of space that offers technology, opportunities for students to be able to interview. Virtual interviews nowadays is becoming more common. Oftentimes our students don't have a professional place. They have homes, they have complicated lives, and we want to be able to put them in the best stead with a space for a career center. And so we're hopeful that Congressman Riley's office will be able to support that effort. And just along the lines, I just wanted to update you on two capital projects, two property projects regarding first the residence halls. So the college has currently 7 residence halls housing about 816 students at its peak. We have 3 buildings right now that are vacant. We are in the process right now of working with the bondholders to sell 3 of the 7 buildings. It's been a number of years since they've had any occupants, and as we look at the trajectory of demographics in our counties, who typically lives in residence halls are traditional age students. That's a declining demographic. And so we are in the process of securing a commercial broker to help us with the sale of those halls, and then we would have to renegotiate. There's about a $40 million bond debt associated with the residence halls that had been, over the years, had occurred, and we would then be working to renegotiate that debt with the bondholders. The sale of the halls, we are looking for a compatible partner with a college campus and certainly with 18-year-old college students living right next door. So we are hopeful. This is a long-standing problem that we're working to address. And then also just wanted to speak to Cultivare. I just came from there. We have also a commercial leasing agent who is helping us with that. That would be a sublease. The TC3 Foundation, which operates Cultivare, is in year 10 of a 30-year lease, and but the expense of that is not something that the TC3 Foundation can continue. So we are hoping to identify a subleasor, if you will, to be able to operate that space. The college is, that's not our area of expertise. And so having that space leased would certainly be a help. We are also right now negotiating with Empire State Development. There were 2 grants provided back in 2013 and 2014, little over $2 million, that had employment requirements associated with them that the college has been unable to fulfill for many years. The property is actually owned, we've learned, by the city of Ithaca, and those funds were used for capital improvements. So we are looking for some support on that end as we work to negotiate, hopefully, the closeout of those grants. So from a governmental standpoint, I'll just add one more thing on the residence halls. The Village of Dryden and the Town of Dryden, we've also been in contact with them to communicate about the fact that we are working to sell the halls and making certain that we have open communication with both the village and the town as to our next steps.
What do you do in your spare time?
It's, here's what I do in my spare time. I get to go to student events and see our students cross the stage. Last night I was at an educational opportunity program celebration. We had 22 students who are getting ready to graduate from families who probably would not have seen that were it not for a program like EOP. And that's what fulfills me. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I do have a question in regards to the 3 buildings that are for sale. As far as the 40 million, they aren't valued, I'm assuming. The 3 buildings are not valued at anywhere close to 40 million.
No.
Is that right? Okay.
No, definitely not. So
Okay.
there would have to be a renegotiation on the debt. It's our intention to maintain the 4 buildings that are closest to campus.
Okay.
A little over 400 beds. We think that's probably realistic given where we are as where we are as 2 counties and a region, and as we look at the demographics. We are asking now the question when students apply, if they are interested in on-campus housing. Right now we have a little over 500 applicants who are interested. Doesn't mean that they will ultimately come, but at the same time, we think that's a positive sign. In the mid-2000s, there was a lot of building going on in community colleges across the state. And the demographics at that point looked good, but as you look out, it just wasn't there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Deborah?
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. So I'm not very familiar with how community colleges are funded. How dependent are you on federal grants of any kind?
All told, we've calculated our federal footprint right now. It's much smaller, certainly, than the 4-year institutions and the research institutions. It's a little, almost $10 million. The vast majority of it, though, is tied up in the Pell program.
And have you received one of those friendly little Dear Colleague letters from the Department of Education?
All colleges have, certainly, and that's something that we continue to watch. We did receive word that the LSAMP program, which we are partnered with Ithaca College, which is designed to help traditionally underrepresented students pursue careers in science, has been canceled. We had a handful of students that were in the program, so from a financial standpoint, it's not a huge impact, but certainly for those students that were depending on that program, it's a massive impact to them.
It's awful.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, it's a bummer we have to end on that note.
Okay. Commencement is coming up on May 21st, and so we invite anyone who would like to come and see our students cross the stage. So we'll end on that. How about
Okay, that sounds great. I like that one much better.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Kremenek? Okay, well, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. We look forward to hearing your presentation for, I know, some budget.
Yes, in June.
Okay, wonderful.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Okay, next we have New York State Association of Counties, and I see that we're joined by Alex and Patrick Cummings. Hello, friends from NYSEC. It's good to see both of you.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Yes.
My name is Alex Regan. I'm a legislative and policy coordinator for NYSEC, and I'm joined by my colleague, Pat Cummings. Pat, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Pat. I'm counsel with NYSEC. Thanks for having us.
So we are here this morning to give you a little bit of an Albany and Washington update. We don't want to be repetitive. It's been said many times that we're still waiting for more details about the final budget bills and what will happen in DC, but we put together some slides that I'll share here to provide you with an update on what we're tracking. And then, of course, we're happy to take questions. So let me share. All right, are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So here is our slides. We will jump right into our state budget update. So as has been said many times now, we do not have all of the state budget documents yet, but we did start to get them last night. So we can share a few details about what we already know is in the state budget. Traditionally, the state budget deadline is April 1st. However, this year we had a very late state budget. I guess not late by historical standards. I understand in some past years it's gone even into the summer and fall, but we are now into May and we have just started to get the state budget documents. So it's very late compared to relatively recent years. On April 28th, the governor announced that a budget agreement had been reached. This was a little bit premature considering it was only last night that we actually got the final budget bills, or at least some of them. But we know that they've got a conceptual agreement, and at this point it's our understanding that the bills are just being updated and printed. There are a number of things that have already been announced by the governor, her staff, the Senate, and the Assembly. And so we want to provide you with some details on what those proposals are. There are some things that we've seen in the budget bills that have come out that we don't want to provide too much information on right now because we always expect there to be more details or more proposals added in the last budget bill that comes out. They call that the big ugly. So traditionally, there's different bills for different issue areas. These are the policy bills in the state budget, what they call Article 7 legislation. So there's one for health and mental health. There is one for transportation, economic development and environment. And as those come out at the end of the enacted budget, you'll see that there's a lot of proposals that are omitted. When something is omitted, that doesn't necessarily mean it won't be in the final budget. It could mean that it took a long time to negotiate a compromise on that proposal, and it will come out in another unrelated bill. So if the revenue bill is the last bill to come out, something that we thought might not be in the budget could be included in that. So that's why we don't want to speak prematurely about anything we've seen yet. But all of this information on the slide, which we'll run through, is things we feel confident reporting. So to start, one of the big hot topics this year in the state budget is the cell phone ban in schools. And I want to defer to Pat on this one to provide some more context for how it might impact your local schools.
Yeah, I've got a couple of kids. So yeah, it's already happened in some schools across the state. The belt, it's getting rid of cell phones in schools. But we're talking about cell phones with internet use. I think there's been some confusion on that. I mean, I think the kids will still be able to, my understanding from reports, we have not seen this, as Alex says, it'll probably be in the alpha bill, the big ugly. But I think kids can still bring in like flip phones that don't have internet access. It's really to stop the usage of things like Instagram or TikTok from bell to bell, from beginning to end. So that's going to include lunchtime. And as I said, I know some schools, my son's school already has a version of this. This is going to expand it. This is going to be, and when it'll start, I don't know exact details. We don't know, but this should impact public schools and I think even private schools across the state. And it's most likely going to look like, I know some experimented with these magnetic pouches to take this individuals' phones, students' phones as they enter school, and then they get them when they leave. We're hearing the language is going to also allow some flexibility to schools. And then there's going to be exceptions. I know there's students that need for language purposes apps on their phone for translation. They're going to be allowed to use that. There's going to be exceptions on this. It's not going to be a one size fits all. But we're expecting this to be in the budget, a version of this.
Another big topic in this year's budget negotiations was strengthening the state's involuntary commitment laws, and the governor has announced that that is included in the enacted budget. So again, we're waiting for more details about what that will look like. A big topic that affects county government is the changes to the state discovery laws, and I want to turn it back to Pat to explain what we've heard about that reform.
Yeah, the DAs were heavily involved with this. This is going back, I'm sure you all know what discovery is, but in 2020, there were some relatively major changes to that. What we're talking about is when your district attorney, your county district attorney, when and how they need to turn and what, really, the definition of what, evidence over to a criminal defense attorney and the criminal defense team, when they have to do that. In 2020, reform happened on this with some abuses in the system that they wanted to correct. So they made the timing on it much shorter, and some for your district attorney as well, or law enforcement in general. That's what the police have as well needs to be turned over, as well as they expanded or at least maybe defined better, let's say, what exactly relevant evidence is that needs to be turned over. There was some pushback over this over the years, in that it became a lot. In fact, you've probably seen some funding from the state because it's difficult to gather all that and get that over in a timely fashion. One other change that happened in 2020 was exactly what happens if this evidence isn't turned over. And some judges were reading that they need to dismiss if there's an abuse in some way, if evidence wasn't turned over, the case should be dismissed. We're anticipating there's going to be so what are the real changes going to happen? I think there's going to be clarification on that to allow judges to have more flexibility to, if the evidence isn't turned over, let's say in time or at all, the judge won't have to dismiss the case outright. They can look at it and say, did this prejudice the case in any way? Yes or no? If no, let's just make sure it's turned over now. Maybe they'll give the defense a recess to process this so they're not getting it right at that moment. But it's going to clarify that judges don't have to dismiss cases for failure to turn over in all cases. But it could also, they could kick out the evidence, or they can still dismiss, is my anticipation from everything I'm hearing.
Thank you, Pat. So these last two proposals illustrate that really public safety has been a big priority for the governor this year. Another top priority for the governor and the legislature has been affordability. There's a lot of proposals in the state budget relating to housing affordability, and we'll provide more details on what ends up in the enacted budget when we release our enacted budget report, which you can expect by the end of this week. But one thing that has been announced already is these inflation refund checks. This was a proposal originally that came from the governor, and what they've landed on is providing $200 for individuals and up to $400 for families to provide some sort of economic relief for the inflation that we're experiencing. Another affordability proposal is related to schools. They've agreed to provide free breakfast and lunch to all K through 12 students in New York.
Alex, can we,
And then
ask a question real quick?
Yeah, thank you. I was curious to know what the projected cost of those inflation refund checks will be in the budget. Do you know?
I'm not recalling off the top of my head, Pat, but you might know.
Don't, but I'll shoot a text to somebody that will, so maybe in real time we can get you that. Give me 1 second. Alex, you keep going and I'll find you an answer. Hold on.
Yeah, we definitely have the answer to that. We'll get that from the rest of our team. But this has been hotly debated how the state could best spend that money to provide relief to New Yorkers. There were certainly people in the legislature who thought it was wiser to invest in programs or other ways to reduce, even the local tax levy by providing relief to local governments. So this was hotly debated, but it really was a signature proposal of the governor. And I think that's how it ended up in the enacted budget. This was something that she felt really strongly about and negotiated for. And so this is what we're expecting to be in the final budget bills, though I haven't actually seen this language yet. So we'll see if this is actually what ends up in those final bills. Another important appropriation in the state budget will be $1 billion investment in climate priorities. I want to highlight this program called the Sustainable Future Program, which is a new investment in, as it sounds, sustainability, resilience, climate adaptation measures. This was originally proposed as a lump sum appropriation by the governor, and then both houses of the legislature put forth their idea of how to divvy up this pot of money, essentially taking some of the authority away from the governor to spend that however she in the division of budget chose to, and providing more guardrails on that funding. We are anxious to see how this gets divvied up because NISAC's priority has been to make sure a portion of this go to county programs. There's programs that I know Tompkins County participates in, like Climate Smart Communities, Clean Energy Communities, the ZEV rebate for infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and for vehicles themselves. And we'd love to see a portion of this appropriation go specifically to programs that you can tap into to support your local climate action plans and climate goals. So we are optimistic that some portion of this appropriation will go to programs that your county can take advantage of. Something else we've been following very closely is the emergency medical services reform proposal. Pat, do you want to dive into this one?
Yeah, and first I want, for clarification purposes, as we put this under that they've reached agreements on, they've agreed to not put this in. So this is not going to be now. It can still be in tomorrow in the Alpha bill, the big ugly. We're hearing with 99.99% certainty it's out right now. That doesn't mean the issue's dead. They're going to have rest of session, as Alex is going to talk about, through mid-June, where they can pass bills. And this might be a standalone bill outside the budget. But right now, there's been a lot of push for EMS reform. Counties I've asked for, we're looking for help on this. The volunteers across the state are getting less and less. We have definitely holes in the system with the EMS, EMT response, and we are trying to get authority to help. We're probably not getting funding to help right now, but what we really wanted is flexibility for counties to make special taxing districts to be able to fill in the gaps where we need, if we voluntarily would like to, or without it, it's such a cost, without it impacting our overall budget, unless we so desire, unless we so choose to do so, right? But we wanted more flexibility there. I think hopefully someday we will see that, maybe this year. The issue is this is such a complex matter that I think it got punted from the budget because there are so many moving parts to this that our ask for something like that is just one piece of what they're looking to do. We also are very weary. We don't want to be left, with this just falling all on counties. If the system breaks down, this is something the state, the federal government, and all local governments are going to need to work together on fixing. And so while we're asking for flexibility here, we also don't want to make sure this turns into a giant mandate on you. So it's that balance that we're looking to strike.
So in that same vein of things that are unresolved right now, we know that at some point the state is going to have to think about adjusting the budget that they enact this month to make changes in response to what is happening at the federal level. What the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie, announced is that they are giving the governor broad authority to make mid-year cuts to the state budget. So whatever NISAC reports in our enacted budget report later this week is all potentially subject to change. There's a world in which the legislature comes back this summer or fall and has greater say in what changes are made to the state budget, or this might be something that's done unilaterally by the governor and the Division of Budget. But we want to, caution as you look ahead to our state budget report and other things that you're seeing in the news, that all of this is subject to change at some point this year, depending on what happens at the federal level.
The state legislature is comfortable with turning that kind of authority over to the governor and the state budget office?
That is what has been reported. So we haven't seen the language in the budget that specifies what exactly this will look like, but from the Assembly, they're saying that they've agreed to provide the governor with this authority, similar to what authority the governor had during COVID.
I'm sure there's going to be guardrails. To your point, though, you're right. It's a balance, and the governor can always make a call for the Assembly and Senate to come back. Session, even though we say it ends in June, it doesn't end until they gavel out on December 31st. So it's just you can't pass a bill unless they're sitting in Albany. So they need to come back, and that's what we really call special session. So they can do this multiple different ways if they need to come back. And this is just, I think, going to be with probably, again, guardrails of some kind, but we'll find out with the details for the governor maybe to make some adjustments based on the federal government. But if it's going to have to be larger than that, you'll definitely see the Assembly, Senate come back to more major changes. My guess is you're going to see the legislature coming back to Albany, and they'll be more of a driver in what happens.
I would hope so. The older I get, the more I see, the less comfortable I am giving anybody broad authority to do anything. Just my 2 cents.
No, it's very fair. And Pat, I appreciate you adding that. Historically, the legislature has not been apt to just give the governor, I should say, a broad authority to make cuts to the state budget. I think this might be anticipating some need to take emergency action. If, let's say, some public health funding is cut, we need to respond right away before the legislature is able to convene and come up with a compromise. This would give the governor the authority to make sure that the state continues operating the way that it's intended to. So we're definitely anxious to see what guardrails are put in this legislation and how this will play out later this year.
Thank you.
As far as, of course, in the short term, we are waiting for the Senate and Assembly to finish printing these bills and then to pass them. I would expect them to be passed by the end of this week. And once again, I'll reiterate, we will have an update for you with all of the details and what's in the state budget coming soon, hopefully by the end of this week, if not early next week. So moving on to the federal budget impact on New York. We know that about $90 billion of New York's $250 billion budget comes from the federal government. So we are very vulnerable to whatever cuts may happen at the federal level. We've seen that the White House is proposing to cut non-defense discretionary spending by almost a quarter. This would impact things like Medicaid, addiction services, other health services, mental health, and then of course housing. And so we are very closely monitoring this along with our colleagues at the National Association of Counties, and we'll provide you with more details as soon as we have information about what actually happens with the federal budget and how that might trickle down to New York. We really appreciated the shout out earlier about the Medicaid video that Stephen recorded. I've just included a slide in here to reiterate why Medicaid cost cuts are a huge impact for New York. Of course, we're concerned about coverage losses for the millions of people who rely on Medicaid coverage, but there could be especially acute impacts in rural areas, particularly related to hospital closures, if Medicaid is reduced or reimbursements are reduced. And then there could be potential cost shift to counties. Now, in New York, we do have the Medicaid cap, so counties aren't going to be asked to pay for a larger share of the state Medicaid program. But if the state is required to take on additional costs in order to maintain services for New Yorkers, there may be other ways that those costs trickle down to counties, whether, maybe public health funding or other sources of funding that counties rely on are reduced. So we're very anxious about how this may impact counties like Tompkins. We would encourage you to continue to talk to your representatives in Congress and then use the advocacy tools available on NACO's website as well as ours. And again, you can visit our website or NACO's website to get updates on this process as it unfolds. Now we're moving on to the end of session. So after we pass the budget bills, again, hopefully this week, we'll have very little time to get the rest of the legislature's priorities done. They're scheduled to adjourn on June 12th, and there's a lot to get done before they adjourn this year. They could always go late. This has happened in the past, but especially as they lost their spring break this year, and there's, other priorities folks have in their district, I think there's a lot of pressure to really get bills moving through the state legislative process and try to get them done before we hit this June 12th intended deadline to adjourn. Some of the things we're following are the county sales tax extenders. We're encouraging all counties to make sure that your bills are moving through the process to make sure they get passed before the end of this year. Of course, the federal budget cuts we already talked about. We're monitoring to see what bills may be introduced to deal with the impacts of those. And then we're advocating for our own end of session priorities. We'll talk about more of those on the next slide. And then as we've already talked about several times now, we are preparing for this fiscal uncertainty. The comptroller is recommending that counties and municipalities increase their financial reserves. New York City is really anticipating a drastic impact from any federal cuts. Counties nationwide are deciding how they are going to deal with potential service reductions and how they may reappropriate costs to make sure essential services are still being provided. And we're already seeing that counties who were relying on certain grants from the federal government are not actually going to see those monies come to their county, and they're dealing with the impacts of projects that might be incomplete or delayed. And so we are really trying to provide you as much information as we can as we go forward in partnership with our colleagues at NACO to at least help you anticipate what might be coming down the pike. Pat, did you have anything to add here before we get into our priorities for the rest of session?
No, other than we're going to take a little bit longer than I hoped on getting you the answer from the $200 to $400, what the total cost is, because my person that answers that would be Dave Lucas, and I heard that Dave Lucas is literally on a stage right now talking to your treasurers and financial officers. He's giving a presentation at our finance school as we speak. So I didn't want to interrupt him now, but we'll get you an answer hopefully later today or tomorrow.
That's great. Thank you.
I will say, I checked our executive budget report, and we had reported at the time that it was $2 billion that would be provided in direct cash assistance. So that should still be the estimate, but we'll confirm that once we've touched base with Dave.
And that probably was Dave that put that in there. So it's like, it is Dave either way, but great find, Alex.
Okay, so moving on to our priorities for the end of session. We will publish, as soon as this budget process is finalized, our end of session priorities advocacy tool. So this is a one-page summary front and back of our top priorities and all of the different sectors that York County cares about. So things like public health, public safety, criminal justice, general government services. But these are our top 5 that we've identified that we think are doable and important priorities for counties for the rest of session. The first one I want to talk about is PREA, the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. This bill, as you nodding your head, has been around for a few years and is something NYSAC has continually supported. We are cautiously optimistic that we can actually get the bill passed this year. What this legislation would do is create an extended producer responsibility, or EPR program, for packaging materials. And so it would shift the cost of managing these materials in the waste stream from counties and municipalities to the producers who put them into the environment. It includes requirements to reduce the amount of packaging that is used. It bans toxic chemicals like PFAS in packaging material. It provides funding for education to make sure residents are actually recycling right. And so there's a number of economic and environmental reasons why NYSAC has supported this bill. There are already 5 states that have enacted packaging EPR bills. When we first started talking about this legislation several years ago, New York was going to be the first, and now we're joining another number of states that have already enacted this bill and have seen the way it's intended to work actually working in their states, as well as there's more than 40 other countries and jurisdictions outside of the US who have enacted this. And really, it does succeed in providing relief to counties and municipalities and reducing the impact of packaging on the environment. In New York in past years, it has passed the state Senate, but it has not made it through the Assembly. We've seen more progress in the Assembly this year. Just yesterday, it was on the codes agenda and passed through that committee. And so we are, again, cautiously optimistic that this bill can be voted on by the Assembly before the end of the year. And if that's the case, it will pass through the Senate as it did last year. And we are hopeful that it will end up on the governor's desk. They'll be able to negotiate some amendments to compromise on what this program looks like, and we'll finally get this done this year. The next priority we want to highlight is the Raise the Age reimbursements. Right now, county reimbursements for Raise the Age are tied to the county property tax cap. And so if a county overrides the tax cap, they're not eligible for Raise the Age reimbursement. We know a number of counties are concerned about the property tax cap this year because of everything happening at the federal level and potential state cuts. And so we want to make sure that these two are no longer linked, and counties that have to override the tax cap are not further penalized for doing so. The next one is the retiree earnings income cap. Pat, do you want to handle this one?
Yeah, we're still struggling across the state to hire good employees or employees. We're having trouble finding people to fill our service needs. This is already under law. You have the ability to hire someone that worked and is collecting a state pension but you can only pay them up to $35,000 a year. We're looking to increase that to 50 to encourage more people to come back to work. It's in keeping with inflation. We think it's very doable. We're hearing good things. I do want to caution on all these things, and even any kind of local home rule that you have that are normally layups to get through. A big problem for us on these kind of bills that seem relatively like we're hopeful is how truncated everything's going to be now because of the budget not passing until today, a couple days from now when it actually passes. And then an anticipated, the legislature's going to be away for, they haven't gone on a vacation yet. They're going to probably go away for a little bit. They're going to still leave in mid-June probably, right, Alex? And so you've got where traditionally they'd have a few months to pass all the bills that the legislature wants. They're going to be passing hundreds and hundreds of bills in a really short time. So things that aren't major priorities for them are going to get left. They won't have the time to do it. So I would say anything you're advocating for, now is the time because of the shorter turnaround.
Thank you for that context, Pat. Yeah, very important to note that this is an unusual year because the budget has gone so long. So we'll really have to see, does the legislature, accept the fact that they're not going to be able to get everything done that they intended to this year? Will they stay late? Will they, anticipate coming back to deal with the budget later and pass some of these bills later? in the year. This is all left to be determined. And that's why NISAC is setting really realistic priorities for this year. We're not going to ask for anything crazy that will take months of negotiation. We think these are doable things that the legislature can actually get done with the time they have left. Two more we want to highlight. One would allow local health departments to request toxicology and death reports. Right now, county coroners and medical examiners produce these reports. They send them to the State Department of Health, and there's not actually a formal mechanism by which counties are entitled to access this information for their local health departments. And so we'd like to see a statutory change to allow your local health department to request this information to inform their opioid surveillance measures, their overdose prevention measures. It only makes sense that this data that is coming from your county and going to the state is able to be accessed by your local health officials. So we'd like to see this legislation enacted this year. And then the final bill we are pushing for as part of our top 5 priorities is removing the cost share for expanded in-home services for the elderly. This is a program that provides non-medical services to elderly individuals to help them stay in their homes. So things like care coordination, other services that one may need to, continue living in their residence. The cost share is prohibitive, especially for many middle-class families and low-income families to be able to take advantage of this. And we'd like to support keeping seniors in their home by removing the state cost share, noting that this program is unique from other programs in this class by having a cost share that other programs do not. Let's see, so this is our contact information, and we're happy to take any questions you might have.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. If you could send that to me, the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm happy to distribute it to committee members as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Any questions
Awesome.
or
Thank you,
comments
guys.
for Mike Ziegler?
I guess Medicaid's obviously the biggest thing I think we're talking about. I mean, I would assume NISAC, it's obviously a big thing, either way. Would you guys be advocating more of a position of cuts to the actual program or cuts of eligibility, if that makes any sense?
Yeah.
So we're not
what it covers versus what it covers. Yeah, exactly.
We have not weighed in on what should be done with the Medicaid program outside of making sure that funding that goes to New York to help the state pay for the program is still going to the state. So we haven't provided a particular policy position on anything that has been proposed. What we're most worried about is trickle-down effects on counties and then impacts from having your residents no longer receive the coverage. So Pat, I don't know if you want to expand upon this, but we haven't really gotten into those weeds. Our message has just been essentially do no harm to counties.
That's right. And by that, it means to really keep the Medicaid capped. It is, we would be in a lot of trouble fiscally for all our other services if that gets impacted at all. We've not heard any proposals on that, by the way. I don't want to send up alarm signals on that of removing the Medicaid cap. But we are vigilant in making sure that they understand that cap needs to remain because we're of all the trickle down that would have on how your operations across the board. So that's making sure that we're not fiscally impacted by these changes is ultimately where we're at. And the Medicaid cap, on the most part, will help achieve that. I think that's where our main focus is.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you, NISAC, for attending today and sharing your thoughts on the budget. Our next meeting in 3 months, hopefully we will have more of an idea of how this is going to impact counties and perhaps a little bit more clarity on what the Medicaid scene will look like as well. But thank you for all the work that you do. You really help counties navigate through some really hard times. We appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you having us today. We're looking forward to joining you hopefully in a few months.
Thank you. Next, we have Cornell University. We're joined here by Jennifer Tavares, Diane Miller, and Zoe Nelson.
Hi there.
Hello.
And we
Monica,
actually brought someone else with us.
Kenny.
We,
Yes.
good, I guess it's afternoon now. Good afternoon. Weren't sure if we were going to be able to, but I'm excited that Monica Yant-Kinney, who is the interim vice president for university relations, is able to join us today. Monica is based in Ithaca and oversees the work of our local community relations, but also our federal and state relations, as well as our media relations, several other things, which I'll let Monica tell you more about. But wanted to introduce her to you, and really, unless anyone has any questions for me about local issues, I was going to turn my time over to Monica today, and then we can bring Diane in. Sound good?
Sounds
okay,
good.
Great.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I was downtown just a minute ago, and then I came back up to campus to kind of babysit Slope Day. So if you hear pulsing music in the background, you know what's happening here. It's really great to be with everyone. And as Jennifer said, I'm about 5 months into the interim role in university relations after a little more than 3 years overseeing our large communications portion of the division. And I'm a very happy resident of Ithaca after moving my family here from the Philadelphia area. And as Jennifer said, while I don't want to at all suggest that there aren't plenty of really important things to talk about locally and around the region, at the moment we are all sort of singularly focused on what's happening in Washington and how Washington is happening to us. Diane and I are probably on speed dial and speed text more now than we ever have been, and the joke is really how many things can happen on a Friday night before anybody actually crawls into bed. It has been just a devastating few months with more to come. I know many of you are already impacted because what happens to universities, what happens to local and state governments, we're all intertwined, we're all in this together, but we are really in an existential fight for survival at this point. And it is extraordinarily challenging how much we're trying to do to remind the public and educate people about the value of scientific discovery, about the value of research, about how university work informs society and contributes to the economy and helps national defense and our global competitiveness. It's just been to see so many good people and so much good work being vilified has been really, really challenging. So we're working really hard. We're doing a lot of financial modeling, as I know many are, trying to determine sort of from a stop work order to an outright termination to sort of a current breach of contract to the prospect of just not having any contracts going forward because agencies might be getting out of this work. What does that mean for the research enterprise, and then ultimately what does that mean for the economy? I'm very blessed to have, besides Jennifer and our community relations team, I'm really, really blessed to have our folks, Charlie and Zoe in Albany, and really Diane as just the expert in all things at the federal level. And I'm very happy to turn over the rest of my time so that Diane can really try to help sort of sketch the picture for everybody of what we're contending with, what has happened, what we think is coming, and if there is any silver lining, Diane will find it for us.
No pressure, Diane.
I never thought that I would ever say that COVID was easier than anything, but COVID was much easier than this because COVID hit everybody and it sort of didn't discriminate or pick on, but Cornell has joined this, handful of universities that has been singled out by this administration for reasons that we don't fully understand and are, sort of trying to navigate our way through whatever it is so that current contracts can continue to be paid. And so, a lot of that work kind of takes place behind the scenes, but what we're really sort of depending on in this, as we work our way through this is this sort of outpouring of testimonials from people who aren't connected with Cornell about what it is that Cornell is doing that makes their lives better, that improves their, and so, the ag community, the folks who work closely with cooperative extension throughout the state have been incredibly strong voices in support of the good that Cornell is doing in the community. And so appreciate all of that input, because it really helps amplify our message beyond, sort of what we, sort of normally talk about, which is, is a lot. And so just, to take a step back from that sort of the focus that's being directed at Cornell, we can talk a little bit about the environment. I know in February I talked about all of the barrage of executive orders that had come. We hadn't sort of seen them implemented. But now, we're looking at the way that this administration is treating federal funding, the way that they're treating federal agencies, cutting staff and cutting programs. And so all of that is starting to manifest, I think, in the future outlook. And so, then activity at Congress is going to play a big part in future funding decisions as well. I know you all have been talking about the impact that this reconciliation process is going to have, in particular, the focus on Medicaid. And so, that's, look at where they are in this timeline of the reconciliation process. In the House, 8 out of the 10 or 12 committees that have to put input into this have completed their markups. Those are the tiniest, except for the Education Committee, which I'll talk about in a second. Those are the tiniest pieces of this. The biggest, the Ways and Means Committee, which has to deal with the tax proposals, and so perhaps
Diane, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your sound is a little wonky. It keeps going in and out.
Oh, I think it's my headphones. Hold on.
Okay.
All right. Is this any better?
That's so much better. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry about that. It's easier to listen with the headphones in. But anyway, I apologize for that. So the reconciliation process is moving forward in the House of Representatives. And so, the biggest piece of it that snapped into place was the Education and Workforce Committee markup, which really targeted the federal student aid programs. Dr. Kremenek didn't talk about it as much. I think it's going to have a bigger impact at a place like TC3 maybe than it does at Cornell. But, when they're talking about efforts to reduce the Pell eligibility, to change what constitutes a full-time student, to change to eliminate the in-school subsidy for federal student loans. I mean, at Cornell, we've done a lot to cap loans, but that right there is going to increase the cost of education if you're not able to defer those interest charges while you're still in school. And eliminating some of the funding for graduates, or the capping graduate student borrowing programs, and eliminating some of the parent borrowing programs. So again, it's sort of focused on making school more expensive for students. And so, we're still trying to figure out, if this goes away, will our financial aid office be able to process applications from, hundreds of different private lenders as opposed to one lender, in the federal government. And so, but put that aside, the 3 pieces of reconciliation that still have to move forward, the Ways and Means Committee, which considers all of the tax proposals, and so maybe the one that has the most relevance is, lifting the SALT cap, which would actually be beneficial for a lot of folks in the community. But then you look at the proposed cuts to Medicaid, and the proposed cuts to SNAP, if they would require, a state match or some state contribution for SNAP benefits. All of that is going to is going to upend the budget process in Albany. It's going to affect, people's lives in communities. And I think it's telling that all 3 of those markups, the 3 biggest ones, have been postponed because of some of the disagreement between the moderates who are pushing against deep cuts and the conservatives who are insisting on the deep cuts. And so there's this, with a 3-vote margin, there's not a lot of room for error. And so that's a particularly sort of tricky needle to thread. And I think, they're still talking about having all of those markups next week. And so I don't know how whose arm is going to get twisted out of the socket to make the math work in this. And, you know, in sort of at Cornell, we're watching some of the provisions in the tax bill that would affect universities. So particularly anything that would increase the endowment tax, because as we're having all this difficulty with our federal funding, that's an attack on philanthropy, which could, you know, potentially help you know, with some of that reduction, but it certainly is important for our institutional aid for our students. And so, again, lots of work that we're doing on that. And then the other piece of it is the discretionary funding. And I know, the last speaker from NACO talked about how there is this proposed, you know, that the president, our sort of Friday surprise last Friday was the release of the president's skinny budget, where they're looking at cutting $163 billion out of discretionary spending. And really, you know, I'm going to focus on the stuff that touches the universities, but I know that, you know, they're talking about eliminating or capping or cutting way back on Section 8 and some of the other community support programs. But, you know, if we want to start with student aid, they want to eliminate the campus-based SEOG, the Supplemental Education Grant Program. They're also talking about cutting 3/4 of the budget for work study and sort of recompeting. And so I think that under their, you know, the one sentence that was available about this, I don't see any way that Cornell would qualify. And when you think about the way that Cornell uses our work study to fund students who are working out in the communities at, you know, local nonprofits and agencies, I mean, I think that that's a sort of a direct hit on that program. They're also proposing to eliminate the TRIO programs, which at Cornell that supports, you know, we work with some high schools through Upward Bound, but we've also got our McNair Scholars Program, which puts first generation kids on a path to go to graduate school. You know, they're proposing to cut the National Science Foundation by more than a half. That funds probably 1/3 of the federal research budget at Cornell comes from the National Science Foundation. They want to cut the National Endowments of Health by 40%. That's more than half of Cornell's federal research funding comes from the National Institutes of Health. And, you know, they're also, the targets at USDA are at, you know, they're looking at, not specified, but eliminating or cutting back the formula capacity programs. And so that's the streams of funding that support our experiment stations that are working on particularly local agriculture problems, agriculture and rural development, but also it's the funding stream for cooperative extension from the federal government as well. You know, and then they also have proposed eliminating the Economic Development Administration and Arts and Humanities and USAID, and so other places where Cornell receives, you know, funding, but also it's the work that benefits, you know, out into the community. And I didn't even talk about energy, EPA, or NOAA. So while this targeted attack, maybe we can work our way through that, but the outlook for funding for the programs that support the work at Cornell is not promising at this point. And so and I talked to Josh Riley this morning. The Science Committee is holding a hearing about, you know, the quantum initiative. And he's like, do you want me to say anything about these cuts at Cornell? I'm like, absolutely. You know, and so I helped him write some questions to talk about how cutting back on these programs sort of is going to disadvantage the economic competitiveness of the country and how it, you know, harms his local community. And so I appreciate that Josh has been paying close attention. He lives here, so he knows what Cornell puts into the community. And God, I just said a lot of words. None of them are particularly happy. So.
Thank you, Diane. My new district actually encompasses Cayuga Heights and Northeast area, and whenever I was petitioning recently, I had many of my constituents that either work in your labs at the USDA or with DoD grants, and the individuals that I spoke with are absolutely concerned about not just their jobs, but their life work and you know, their passions. And, you know, I think all of us realize we base so much of our life on history and science, and, that's the way that we make really good decisions, is looking at the data. And, without having the research aspect of Cornell, it really devalues what Cornell has to offer. And so I certainly, as someone who has constituents, my wife went to Cornell, I realize the value of what's being done in our small community, and how important your economy is to our economy. I did have a question in regards to the endowment tax. Do you happen to know what the breakdown of the tax is, as far as how much would be federal, state, and local?
So the endowment tax that's proposed, I mean, there's currently, it's an excise tax on the income from investments of universities who have endowments that are greater than $500,000 per student. Cornell doesn't hit that threshold just quite yet because we have a large student body. So if our denominator wasn't so big, we would have paid this tax a while ago. And it's a federal excise tax, so I don't know that there's a state portion of it. I think New York State would have to enact a law, and we are very much opposed to that. But some of the proposals that we have seen would perhaps increase that tax to 10%, so from 1.4% to 10%, that they would lower the threshold to $200,000 per student, which would bring in a lot more colleges besides just places like Cornell, or that they would knock international students out of the denominator because their justification being that international students aren't eligible for federal student aid programs, so they shouldn't be counted in this calculation. There are also proposals out there that would sort of tie it to behavior. So if your graduate student loan default rate is over a certain percentage, then you'd have to pay a tax. Or if you are under investigation for civil rights violations, you'd have to pay a tax. And so it's still a big moving target. And so one that we're working to, we don't think that repeal is feasible, but it's something that we want to not make worse.
Sure. I guess my other question too is around student visas, and do you foresee a travel ban or it harder for, I know that a third of, or 30% of the students at Cornell are international, and many of them, bring their finances here, they're paying full tuition, which allows, local kids to pay less. And so, is that something that you're hearing?
It's a great point. We're monitoring that very closely. The numbers and the percentages can really fluctuate between the undergraduate, graduate, and professional communities. There are certainly some programs that are much, much higher than others, and certainly some programs that have a much higher concentration from certain parts of the world that are feeling that vulnerability. I can share that we are making provisions for students that are already here to stay for the summer, because they are weighing the landscape and have reason to believe that if they went to see family, they couldn't come back. And that is tragic, but it's also an opportunity that we have and a responsibility that we're taking. So we are certainly making those. What we are hearing anecdotally, and certainly our international office is getting a lot of this, is that it's going to be a very unusual summer in terms of possible moving into the wait list because people who put a deposit down change their mind, or again, if we have this sort of June surprise that we're thinking of, that there will be a large swath of students, depending on who is targeted, where it's just too onerous to come, whether come back or come for the first time. We had, the visitor office is part of our division, and my staff over there, they run all the tour guides, the kids who walk backwards, and we had some international visitors recently who the parents shared that, parents who could make a choice, who might normally be really wanting their kids to come to the States for college, are just really rethinking that. Yeah. And If they're in Europe, maybe they stay somewhere else in Europe. If they're in Asia, maybe they go someplace in Europe or go someplace else in Asia. And we all know that that will have a tremendously challenging impact. And what is so ironic is that we know that U.S. students cite diversity, they cite lived experiences, and they cite that as what they seek out in attending a college. And the notion that that students from our community would not get to be with and learn from and with alongside people from around the world is something that we're all very, very worried about.
Yeah, so the only thing I'll add to that is that we did have a handful of students have their SEVIS records terminated, but then those were all reinstated. But I think we're just sort of waiting for that other shoe to drop. And again, this is sort of how the administration chooses to implement those executive orders that they, made during the first days of the administration, and sort of what countries end up on their, go, no go list. And so that hasn't been published yet, but I think, we're expecting it. And so, that will, I think, play into how, again, what happens with our international student population if students can't get visas. And, the flip side of that is how does that impact our ability to send students to study abroad programs? And will there be any kind of reciprocal effects? And we don't have a sense of that yet, but I think that's a possible impact of that as well.
Great, thank you. As an aside, my kids were really excited that Gunna is going to be at Slope Day today, and we were hoping to park outside of the cage, the fence that you have set up so that we could hear spin back. So just wanted to let you know.
Well, it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be loud. The jokes just keep on coming.
It's true. Yes.
If all else fails, feel free to walk into Day Hall. My office will be thumping soon.
That's good. I'm excited. Very nice.
Yeah, so Shauna, I see that Maury has his hand up too. I don't know if you saw that earlier.
Yeah, go ahead, Maury.
What I was going to ask before, when you were, going in, a lot of detail about the potential federal impact, is have you, recognizing that everything is up in the air, sort of tallied up what the total impact is of the potential loss of federal funds?
So I can talk a little bit about this because it's a moving target. And actually President Kotlikoff and Provost Bala met with the Cornell Daily Sun leadership at the end of last week, and they just published the story about that. And, all they're really able to say right now is that they're looking at the hundreds of millions of dollars. And in part because we have everything from stop work orders, if a switch is flipped off, it's maybe flipped back on, it could be flipped off again going forward. We have the outright terminations, which again could be appealed, and we'll see what happens there. And then we have the looming threat of these sort of the changing calculations of the administration and facilities fees, the indirect costs that are have always been an essential component of undertaking research and part of that equation, and that in some cases the government's saying, well, we're going to cut them right now for existing grants, but in the case most recently that we just filed litigation on, they said, we're actually going to do this prospectively. We're going forward. We're just telling you right now we're changing the terms of engagement. And so having a set number on any given morning or afternoon is really difficult because of that. But the president has been clear that we are talking about the hundreds of millions of dollars already.
And as a follow-up to that, is there yet, or will there be a task force or some effort to figure out, how the university goes on in the absence of this federal funding, on the assumption that, this is going to be the state of affairs for at least the next 4 years, if not longer?
Yeah, great question, Maury. There has been one. We have been meeting at least 3 times a week since the beginning of January, and Diane and I and a cast of many others are a part of that early morning conversation, and our trustees are highly engaged. You recall that I guess it was maybe February or early March, where we sort of announced a hiring pause and some reconsiderations around spending. We're anticipating more communication about sort of what we do. I think that took us into June, and I think we're going to have to make some communication about what we do from June onward. But we have not, Columbia just announced, sort of the first very public phase of staff reductions that they've had to take based on their cuts to their research enterprise. We have not done that, but you can be assured that we're thinking about all considerations. There's so many, when you think about the legal cases that we've filed and the appeals that we've made and the conversations happening behind the scenes, there's just so many different pieces on any given day that the decision about sort of what exactly to do can really depend on, do we get a final decision from somebody about whether this is on or off? Or again, going forward, like if you had a 5-year grant and you only had 1 more year left in the grant, but if the die is cast that there will be no more funding from that agency, that is an entirely different set of financial issues that we have to contend with, because it really will absolutely change the research enterprise for the institution.
Yeah, what I was wondering, I recognize the belt tightening part of it, but the question was more, sort of imagining how the university can thrive without federal involvement, on the assumption that federal involvement is going away for 4 years or more, or is being substantially reduced for 4 years or more. How does Cornell, how do major universities thrive in the absence of that funding stream?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I know leaders, presidents, provosts, all of our leadership groups are having conversations about that. Diane is really active with AAU and our other member organizations. I feel like it's on the agenda in almost every conversation we have.
I mean, that's why the focus on philanthropy is so important at this point, because there have been targeted efforts to talk to alumni, people who've sponsored, who have been generous with giving to financial aid programs about, perhaps increasing that if the federal funds fall off. And it's also talking about sort of doing more targeted research with corporate sponsors, which doesn't, that benefits the corporation. It doesn't necessarily benefit the country, but it's a way to keep people employed, during this pause in federal funding. And so it's really, it's lots of conversations and sort of building on efforts that we have. But if we lost, this, big pieces of this funding, how would we continue? And it's to pivot overnight it's a difficult, lots of difficult conversations. But
Thank you. I have Deborah Dawson and then Jennifer Tavares.
Yeah, thank you all. We're all living in difficult times. But if I could offer a perspective from an outsider watching all of this play out, and my son is finishing 2 PhDs in biochemistry related fields at Columbia. So I have kind of a front seat to that one, and then I have friends affiliated with Harvard. Watching this play out, there seems to be a spectrum of responses by the university community. My perception, based on what my son has observed, is that Columbia kind of caved. Harvard's holding fast. Cornell's somewhere in the middle. We have state universities led by institutions like Rutgers who are entering into like mutual aid agreements. I would urge you and any other university to try to join forces with all the other universities. I know you have to struggle to figure out how you're getting by in the interim, but I think that if you all joined forces and resisted strongly, you would be supported by efforts by other educational organizations like the one that filed the lawsuit in New Hampshire. And eventually, I think that what this administration is doing is transparently illegal. And I think that you have the judiciary who are willing to stand up to this BS. I would hope that you would stand strong and unite with all the other universities in the wider community and resist like there's no tomorrow.
Thanks for that. Thinking very good thoughts about your son. Is he close to finishing? And
He's almost done. He was supposed to be done in December, but they asked him to stay a little longer because they wanted him to do another iteration of his main experiment. So I'm hoping he's out of there by June.
well, we need him doing the work, so thank you.
Jennifer?
Oh, did you have a question for, in case they need to jump off? I'm just going to provide some of Zoe's updates, so you can go ahead.
My thinking is exactly opposite of Deborah's.
I'm shocked.
Well, I would just be a little more choosy about who you choose to team with. Let's put it that way. Cornell, I think, has set itself up actually pretty well. I have a very easy time defending Cornell. When it came to anti-Semitism, the people on your staff handled it so much better than U of Penn, than Columbia, than Harvard. Those three schools primarily, I think, have a real problem. I'm not actually sure what they can do to kind of dig them way out. If Cornell wants to team itself with other universities, I mean, you just handled yourself so much better. And I don't know, my questions were going to be things like, which campus is going to take the biggest hit? I mean, is it going to be our medical school? Is it going to be the school up here? Is it going to be the tech school? Cutter? What I mean, is the school making up a priority list of things it's really going to advocate for? Are there programs that you're looking at going, while that's important, this is one of our signature things. I mean, we have to keep this at Weill Medical School. If we lose that, it would be like Sloan Kettering not doing cancer research. That's what I mean about Cornell. There's got to be certain things. Your nanotechnology, for example, I could see you going to Capitol Hill and going, we're the best at this. I don't think you understand. I mean, you can look at these other programs and maybe there's an argument, but this thing is, we're it. And if you cut it, then that goes away and America loses. So I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for Harvard or Columbia. I know, I mean, I went to Columbia. It was awful, what I've seen. It was not like that when I went to school there. So so I'm not completely disagreeing with Deborah. I think you have to be choosy on your partners in this, or maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong.
Funny that you mentioned CNF, the Center for the Cornell Nanoscale Facility. They're going to be in Washington next week for some advocacy around the National Science Foundation budget. So, I mean, the facilities are important. It's really hard to say this is more important than something else. I mean, the cuts, the elimination of the National Endowment for the Humanities. I mean, that's a tiny drop in the bucket for the federal funding that comes to Cornell. But it's somebody's life work, and it's really important scholarship. And so I try not to, make those distinctions. I know some of the, but as we're sort of working our way through some of these problems, we've got active clinical trials where if you pull them in the middle, you're going to interrupt the course of somebody's treatment. If you close this facility, then, we have all of, plants in the greenhouse that, need tending to. And, this was some of the things that came out with some of the, cuts to the USDA staff that work on our campus. And so, I mean, there's some sort of immediate things that we have to address, but sort of long-term, I'm not trying to set it up like that. And at some point I may have to make those kinds of distinctions, but so far I haven't, because I think it's all important, because it's all an attack on higher education in the United States. And so we're really trying to make that And, you know, I mean, we're all part of the same associations and we're all sort of advocating for the same thing. But when I go and advocate, I don't talk about what they're doing at Harvard. I talk about what we're doing at Cornell and point to, you know, the things out in the county and the things, you know, the things on campus and the work that we're doing to, you know, educate the next generation of people who are going to lead this country, and also, you know, the research that's going into, you know, making the next, a quantum computer that we can all use. And so, I mean, that Harvard can talk about what Harvard does, but we're going to talk about what Cornell does. But again, the end goal is all the same, as sort of restoring the importance of higher education. I mean, you know, this threat to take away the tax exemption because there's no public good that comes from a research university or from a university is just, you know, it's
Ignorant.
Yeah, hard to get your head around.
Deborah and then Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, we experienced our own little run of, you know, the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel rants. We had 10 to 12 hours of that when the war in Gaza first started. I found it repellent. I thought some people were clearly anti-Semitic. I thought that it demonstrated ignorance at worst, and perhaps a lack of nuance in people's understanding of history of the Middle East. But people have a First Amendment right to their opinions, even if their opinions don't appeal to me. And I frankly think that the administration's pretense of acting out of concern for anti-Semitism is that, a pretense. This is an anti-education move. It's an anti-First Amendment move. I don't think you should be selective in choosing to join forces to fight this encroachment on a constitutional right to your opinion. I don't like to see universities and colleges put in a position where they're supposed to censor people who express a certain view and get punished if they don't do that. So my advice stands, and I don't think we need to be picking and choosing who we support when people are exercising their First Amendment rights.
Okay, I just want to have a time check. It is 12:41, and we do have Austin here from Gillibrand's office. Yep. So
2 seconds.
Okay.
I'll be super fast.
Yep.
Thanks so much, Monica and Diane. Zoe was very sorry she had to leave. She had another meeting. Just wanted me to share, if of interest to you folks, SUNY budget and avian influenza testing are two of the key priorities that we're working on in Albany related to the budget. Also, maybe of interest is a bill for interstate psychological services, an interstate compact on psychological services, and what that might do is allow our students to access services in their home state versus relying on services here, obviously not just for us, but also statewide, for those folks who have residency elsewhere but are temporarily in New York State. And obviously these are services in high demand everywhere, so that might be a positive outcome and might take pressure off elsewhere in the system. So anyway, those were Zoe's contributions. Thanks for the extra time.
Great, thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Diane and Monica, for joining us today. I mean, I think what we've realized, obviously during COVID, and while this is much different than COVID, there are many similarities, and we realize that we're having to bond together and share ideas and, you know, kind of fight certain things that are not helping our community. So I just want to say that our partnership is really invaluable. I know that this afternoon we're having a meeting about an underwriters meeting in regards to TCAT. So just another collaboration that we really need each other for, and together we can serve our community better. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm going to walk out into the mud. We'll see what's going on out there.
I am so sorry. I'm going to miss what Austin has to say because he is a tremendous partner. We appreciate the support from our local, both of our senators, our local congressmen, and, you know, others in New York State. And thanks, Shauna, for having us here. And, we'll definitely stay in touch. And maybe in 3 months, we will have better things to talk about.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, we can always hope.
Cross your fingers. Great.
Bye-bye.
Rock on, Monica.
Welcome, Austin Ponce from Senator Gillibrand's office.
Hello, thank you for having me. Thank you, Legislator Dawson, Legislator Black, and Legislator Sigler. Thank you, County Administrator, for the opportunity to appear here before you all today. It's very evident that the hot topic of today has been activity in Washington. And I either have the fortune or misfortune of going last in today's list of speakers when the federal government has been the main topic for today. So again, my name is Austin Ponce. I serve as the Senator's Rochester Finger Lakes Regional Director. I help Senator Gillibrand cover a 10-county region of New York State, of which Tompkins County is one of them. And of course, one of them with a lot of activity. And so there are any number of items that I could talk about and share with you today. I think in the interest of time and some of the conversations that we've already had today, did want to turn it over to the legislators to see if they had any particular questions or concerns that I could try and address.
Medicaid.
Yes, Medicaid. As Diane and NYSAC have already thoroughly alluded to, at this point in time, Republican leadership has not yet finalized the legislative text of their reconciliation package, but we can talk about what we broadly expect to be in there based upon the administration's priorities and instructions in the resolution that Republicans passed in the House and Senate last month. Our current understanding is that this would be an increase of over $5 trillion to the budget, which would include an extension of the tax cuts, as well as an increase of defense spending by $150 billion, as well as a large increase to Homeland Security funding. And to pay for these increases, the bill will likely include cuts of at least $1.5 trillion in the federal budget. Principally, a lot of this is coming from Medicaid. We all know the figure, the $880 billion figure that first emerged in the House. They're seriously considering significant changes to the program. I do think there is a silver lining of sorts that in recent days, public reporting suggests that Speaker Johnson and his caucus are looking to take any FMAP cuts off the table, as well as exclude any per capita cap costs as well, which we know would have a particular impact on our counties. I mean, these cuts will have an impact on state budgets, solvency of counties, which will then lead to cuts in healthcare reimbursement and eligibility. This is going to hit nursing homes and hospitals, our federally qualified health centers, the institutions that are tasked with caring for their patients without regard for their ability to pay. And so this is something that we are, of course, closely monitoring and stand in strong opposition to these cuts as proposed, and would echo those calls for maintaining that outreach to your federal elected officials. Rest assured, I will carry our conversations and today's meeting back to Senator Gillibrand as well. But certainly keep up the pressure and talk to your colleagues in other neighboring counties, whether they're represented by Republicans or Democrats. The impacts to New York State and New York counties and the individuals that live here cannot be understated if these cuts do go through as proposed.
May I ask, are you hearing anything about the Medicaid provider tax being challenged?
Not specifically. What are you hearing, or what are your particular
Well,
concerns?
I read an article that that they feel that this Medicaid provider tax, which was originally referred to as Metascam, could, if it was eliminated, could save the federal government somewhere around $600 billion over the next 10 years. So that might be one way they could approach cutting it, and I was just curious if you had heard anything about that.
Okay. I have not heard anything specifically about that, but I'm happy to take that back to our team and see if we're tracking any changes or developments there in the House or Senate.
Thank you. I have another question. So I spent 30-some years working for federal agencies, starting with the Justice Department Tax Division, and I worked for the RTC, the FDIC, and the Federal Trade Commission, and I am really concerned about what the administration is trying to do to agencies across the board. I know that a lot of these are technically executive agencies, but many of them were established by Congress, and I'm trying to understand how he can defang or destroy an agency that was created by the legislature, and the legislature just sort of stands by and lets it happen. What is Congress and the Senate doing about this?
I mean, one of the strongest tools that we have right now are the courts. And the courts have been where we've been able to secure some of our best and strongest victories in trying to go against some of what we're seeing from this administration. I mean, we're talking about federal workers in particular. It is precisely the courts that have helped lead to the reinstatement of a lot of the federal employees that have been impacted by either partial, whether it's reduction in force or wholesale elimination of agencies. But a broader theme here is Congress reasserting their role in this process, and the nature of Congress being what it is that Republicans control both the House and Senate. And I understand that's not a satisfying answer, but it is a reality of our current Congress right now, and that we are trying to find avenues of where we can work with Republican members to try and blunt some of the negative impacts that we're seeing, particularly when we're talking about something like Medicaid. But they're hard. They're challenging. I think you've seen that once staunch allies that we could rely upon in the Senate on certain issues have very quickly rolled and are no longer showing up to the fights that we could once depend them to join with us on like they did before. We of course stand in opposition to the erratic nature of how this administration has gone about wholesale shuttering agencies, if not heavily reducing staff numbers. I mean, just last week, the senator was traveling around the state talking about what reductions at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, what impact that has had on our Head Start providers across the state. 50,000 enrollees, 50,000 children in Head Start across New York. And because of reductions at the Region 2 office, which oversees New York State, our Head Start providers are in a difficult position where they're no longer able to speak to agency staff on any challenges or issues that they're seeing with their grant. They're in a very precarious state right now, not knowing if their grants, which are traditionally reauthorized with ease, are going to exist in a matter of months. And so we are working where we can to try and address these impacts when and where they occur. Something that is very helpful in that effort is us hearing these impacts locally. Something that has really changed in this Congress is that we used to have much, much more regular and reliable communication with the executive agencies. Yes, certainly in the Biden administration, but even in the first Trump administration, while we may have disagreed on matters of policy quite often, we still had the ability to connect and reach out with individuals at the agency. That dynamic has dramatically shifted in this new administration, and so we are not necessarily getting proactive notification or communication about when we're seeing.
Pam Bondi's not taking your calls.
Unfortunately not. So with that, something that I like to echo in all of our meetings and any meetings that I have with stakeholders is that we need to know what we need to fight for, right? We can't fight for what we are not hearing about. And I would say I feel we have strong communication here in Tompkins, but want to maintain that and just emphasize that point now more than ever, that we need to hear about these impacts because that news won't always travel to us in the mediums that they traditionally did before.
Thanks, Austin.
Great. Any questions, comments for Austin? Okay, well, thank you all for attending. This meeting is,
Depressing.
well,
Uplifting.
I won't go that far, but it's always very helpful to have the conversations and, hopefully come up with some strategies moving forward. And it is definitely going to be telling over the next few months what the state budget looks like, what our budget looks like, and the numbers that we're looking at for Medicaid. So thank you all for your hard work and dedication to this work, and we'll continue the conversation. Have a good day.
We adjourned?
You're adjourned.